A devastating twin earthquake struck Venezuela last night, with initial reports indicating at least 164 dead and predictive modeling suggesting thousands more could be lost. This catastrophe may reshape the geopolitical landscape and test the newly formed alliance with the United States. In the aftermath of the devastating earthquakes, several critical actions are expected to unfold. First and foremost, massive international aid efforts will be mobilized, with countries like the US and Canada preparing to send emergency response teams, medical supplies, and rescue equipment to assist Venezuela. The earthquakes have caused widespread destruction, leaving thousands homeless and in dire need of assistance. The U.S. military may also deploy rescue units to assist in search and rescue operations, particularly in areas that are inaccessible to civilian aid. This disaster strikes as Venezuela grapples with a humanitarian crisis characterized by severe food shortages, economic collapse, and political instability. The situation is further complicated by years of strained relations between the U.S. and Venezuela, which have been marked by sanctions and diplomatic hostility. The political pressure on the Trump administration will intensify, forcing it to provide immediate assistance and coordinate international relief efforts effectively. The response to this disaster will serve as a litmus test for the U.S.-Venezuela alliance, which has been fraught with tension in recent years. If the U.S. demonstrates swift and effective action, it could strengthen the partnership and showcase the value of collaboration in times of crisis. Conversely, failure to respond adequately could undermine the alliance, damage Trump's credibility, and create a vacuum for other powers, such as Russia or China, to assert influence in Venezuela. In the coming days, it will be crucial to monitor the level of international aid being mobilized and the effectiveness of the rescue efforts. How the U.S. and Venezuelan governments navigate this crisis will determine the long-term implications for the region. The unfolding situation could redefine not only Venezuela's internal dynamics, but also the broader geopolitical landscape in South America, influencing future international relations and humanitarian strategies. As aid flows commence, the focus will shift to sustainability and rebuilding efforts in the affected regions. Venezuela has been rocked by a devastating earthquake, exacerbating an already dire humanitarian crisis. The country's susceptibility to such a disaster is deeply rooted in a history of political instability, economic decline, and infrastructural neglect. For years, Venezuela has grappled with chronic underfunding of essential services, leading to critical areas such as emergency preparedness and building safety suffering from a lack of investment. Weak building codes and inadequate enforcement have allowed unsafe structures to proliferate in high-risk zones, increasing vulnerability to natural disasters. Political fragmentation has resulted in frequent changes in leadership, creating a lack of coordinated national planning that further complicates the situation. The recent political shift, marked by President Trump's armed intervention and a subsequent alliance with the U.S., was intended to restore stability to the nation. However, the earthquakes have exposed the hollowness of this supposed stability, revealing just how unprepared Venezuela is for a crisis of this magnitude. The economic isolation that Venezuela has faced has severely limited access to international aid and technology crucial for effective disaster preparedness and response. This history of neglect has now culminated in a humanitarian catastrophe, with thousands feared dead, and a nation plunged into chaos as it grapples with the aftermath of this natural disaster. The impact of this tragedy is profound, as communities begin to mourn their losses while struggling to access basic necessities. Hospitals, already strained, are overwhelmed with casualties, and the infrastructure damage complicates rescue efforts. Looking forward, Venezuela must urgently address its systemic weaknesses to build a more resilient society capable of withstanding future crises. This includes investing in infrastructure, enhancing emergency response systems, and fostering political unity to ensure a more secure future for its citizens. The catastrophic earthquakes in Venezuela have unleashed a wave of destruction, resulting in thousands feared dead and countless others displaced. These seismic events have not only triggered a humanitarian disaster, but have also led to significant geopolitical upheaval. The Venezuelan government, already beleaguered by years of economic collapse and political turmoil, is now under immense pressure to respond effectively to this crisis. The nation's infrastructure, long neglected due to ongoing instability and mismanagement, is severely compromised, complicating recovery efforts. Hospitals are overwhelmed, and the supply chains for essential goods have been disrupted, exacerbating the suffering of the Venezuelan people. Historically, the relationship between Venezuela and the United States has been fraught with tension, often characterized by opposing political ideologies and strategic interests. In recent years, the U.S. has imposed sanctions on Venezuela, aiming to pressure the government into democratic reforms. However, the recent earthquakes have intensified this dynamic, forcing the U.S. to navigate its foreign policy approach carefully. President Trump's controversial remarks about stabilizing Venezuela through military intervention have raised eyebrows and further complicated diplomatic efforts. A failure to respond promptly and adequately could undermine the fragile alliances the Trump administration has sought to build, particularly in counteracting the growing influence of nations like Iran and Russia in Latin America. The humanitarian impact of this disaster is already profound, with families left without homes, food, or access to clean water. The plight of the Venezuelan people underscores the catastrophic consequences of prolonged underinvestment in essential services and the destabilizing effects of political unrest. The need for international assistance is critical, but the response must balance humanitarian imperatives with geopolitical realities. Looking ahead, the recovery process will require not only immediate relief efforts, but also long-term investments in infrastructure and governance. As the Venezuelan government seeks assistance from the international community, strategic responses are essential. The outcomes of these decisions will shape Venezuela's future trajectory and its relationships with global powers. The path forward will demand coordinated efforts that prioritize both humanitarian relief and the rebuilding of trust between nations. On June 25, 2026, two powerful earthquakes struck Venezuela within hours of each other. The first quake registered a magnitude of 7.2 at 9:42 p.m. local time, centered near the coastal city of La Guaira. Just 54 minutes later, a second, more powerful earthquake with a magnitude of 7.5 hit the same region. Initial reports confirmed at least 164 fatalities, but the U.S. Geological Survey warned that the actual death toll could reach into the thousands due to the high population density and fragile infrastructure in the affected areas. Rescue operations commenced immediately, with emergency teams working through the night to search for survivors amid the rubble. Hospitals quickly became overwhelmed with the influx of casualties, as communication lines were disrupted in many areas. The full extent of the destruction remains unclear, but dozens of individuals are reported missing, and entire neighborhoods have been cut off from aid. This disaster occurs against a backdrop of significant political instability and economic collapse in Venezuela. The nation has faced years of turmoil, marked by hyperinflation, food shortages, and a fractured healthcare system, which has left many citizens vulnerable. The weakened state infrastructure has made it difficult to respond effectively to such disasters, raising concerns about the government's ability to manage the crisis. The earthquakes have exacerbated an already dire humanitarian situation, placing further strain on resources in a country that has struggled to provide for its citizens. The impact of these earthquakes extends beyond immediate casualties and destruction. Communities that were already facing hardships now confront the reality of further displacement and loss. The psychological toll on survivors is profound, with many grappling with trauma and uncertainty. Recovery efforts will be hampered not only by the destruction, but also by the ongoing political challenges that hinder coordinated responses. Looking ahead, international aid organizations are poised to intervene, but the effectiveness of these efforts will depend largely on the Venezuelan government's willingness to cooperate. Local authorities must prioritize rebuilding efforts and restoring essential services. The resilience of the Venezuelan people will be tested once again as they face the daunting task of recovery in the wake of this devastating natural disaster. The twin earthquakes in Venezuela pose a monumental challenge for the U.S.-Venezuela alliance. How will this disaster reshape the geopolitical landscape? Share your predictions in the comments below and subscribe for daily deep dives into major global events.